This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
We now come to consider the subject of microeconomics, and this deals with the prices of products and the volume of products that might sell, and how the demand for these products might be changing. So early on we did with what was called aggregate supply and aggregate demand. This was like all goods and services in the economy. Now we're getting down to looking at individual items, tins of peas, gallons of diesel, and so on. And the first thing we have here is the typical demand curve. Here it's been drawn as a straight line. It doesn't have to be a straight line, but it connects really the quantity demanded by buyers to the price. And as you would expect on this, as the price decreases, so the price goes down from here down to there, then the demand is going to increase from there to there. So decreases in price are going to increase the demand. Conversely, increases in price will decrease the demand or the quantity which is required. In theory, though, you can find some products which might show a demand curve something like that. These are pretty unusual, in many ways very illogical. The sort of products which are talked about in this sort of light might be some sort of luxury products where people demand more the higher the price gets, maybe because it allows them to kind of show off their wealth in some way, or for some reason the products seem to acquire a greater allure because of the higher price. But during this we'll be considering ordinary products bought by ordinary people who are logical, who will not pay or not want to pay more for more of the product and so on, or if the price goes up will not demand more. Now, as we go up and down the demand curve, we have to be careful of two different movements, if you like, on the demand curve. So as you change the price and the quantity changes, you're moving along the demand curve. But it's possible to shift the whole demand curve to the right, or indeed to the left. So in other words, for a given price, we move it along to there, and at the same price, you're going to have more demanded. So here we had maybe Q1 demanded, here we have a quantity Q2 demanded. Now what is going to cause this shift, this rightwards shift in a demand curve? And it is going to be influences like maybe advertising. So a large advertising campaign makes the product look very desirable, tells more people about it, and people will go out and purchase it. Or it could just be fashion or habit. A product acquires a popularity, and the demand for that product is going to be going up in some way. There's a shift to the right of the shifting to the right. You can also shift to the left, of course, so that at a given price the demand is actually going to fall back there. And this could be caused by maybe the product going out of fashion, or maybe a health scare surrounding the product, and people, even at the same price, will not go near that product. They don't want to buy that product because maybe they're frightened of it. So get clear in your own mind, up and down along the demand curve is something which is influenced by price. Shifts to the right, shifts to the left, is you're saying at the same price either more is demanded or less is demanded, and you have to think what sort of things might cause that. An important measure in the relationship between price and quantity is what's known as the elasticity of demand, which is basically how sensitive is the quantity demanded to a change in price. So if you were to put the price down by 10%, would the demand for the product rise by 10%, or would it rise by maybe 25%, or would it barely rise at all, maybe by 1%? So if something has got a high elasticity of demand, it means it's very price sensitive. The strict calculation for this is the proportional or percentage change in demand divided by the proportional or percentage change in price. It's not done in absolute terms. It is not the change in demand over the change in price. It is a proportional change in demand over the proportional change in price. And here we have the demand curves for two products. We have the red one and the blue product here, two different products. And you see for a given change in price, for example, here to here, or here to here, looks about the same change in price. The change in demand is very different, quite a large change in demand there, and quite a small change in demand there, for the given roughly the same change in price which we've got there. Now, if you get a small change in price giving rise to a relatively large proportional change in demand, then you have something which is relatively elastic. So the flatter the line, the more elastic it is. It means for a very small change in price, you're getting a relatively large change in volume. If the line is steep, then the change in price is going to give rise to a relatively small change in volume, and you're talking there about something which is inelastic or relatively inelastic. In other words, is relatively price insensitive in those situations. Now we have to know how to calculate these. So here we have a demand curve. This time it's been drawn as a curve rather than a straight line, but it doesn't really matter too much here. We know the price is going here from 6 to 8 or 8 to 6 in here. And we'll say here, let's say, for the sake of argument, that we have got 1400 in there is where this line comes down. And so for a change of price of 2, we have got this change of demand of 600. But remember, we are looking here at proportional changes in quantity versus proportional changes in prices. And basically there are two ways of trying to calculate this. First of all, you can have the point elasticity of demand. So this is saying, what is the elasticity of demand at 8, at a price of 8, when we change it by 2, okay, when we decrease it by 2. And when we decrease it by 2, the demand has gone from 1400 to 2000. So the proportional change in quantity is going to be 2000. That's where it goes to. And it started at 1400. And it started at 1400. So this is a proportional change in the quantity. So we're doing it from the starting point. Okay, the starting quantity here was 14. And we will put that over the proportional change in price, again from the starting point. So it's gone from 8 here. And we are taking the price down to 6. Now you see here, I've fiddled around with the signs a little bit here, and we've got the starting point here. We're starting at 8. Okay. In particular, this top one here, we could have written it the other way around. We could have said, well, we're actually starting at 1400, we're moving to 2000 there. And strictly speaking, the elasticity of demand is always going to be a negative figure. It simply says as price increases, the quantity decreases, but you always ignore the sign, okay? So you don't need to worry what way round the subtractions are, but you must worry, however, for the point elasticity of demand, if we're doing it with point elasticity of demand at a price of 8, 8 is your starting point. So what we've got in here, we have a proportional change in price here. Well, a big quantity. The quantity is changing on the top here, 600. and divide that by 1400. The proportional change in quantity is, let's say, 0.43. And the proportional change in price, well, we've got a change here of 2. 2 divided by 8 is 0.25. And say, as I say, ignore the signs. It doesn't matter what way around the signs are. So just ignore it. So we have in there 0.43 divided by 0.25. That's 1.72. Now 1.72 means that for the smallish proportional change in price, the quantity proportional change is much bigger. Okay, so this here shows elastic. This is called elastic. And elastic is anything which is greater than 1. Okay, again ignoring the signs. So this means that for a proportional change in price, the proportional change in quantity is relatively volatile, relatively jumpy there. If it was less than 1, so if it's less than 1, then it's said to be inelastic. So if it was down at, let's say, 0.2, that means you've changed the price proportionally quite a bit, but the quantities change very little. So the quantity is relatively isolated, if you like, from the change in price. It's an inelastic demand. It is insensitive. And if it equals 1, then it means that proportional change in price will cause an equal proportional change in volume. Now this is quite important in thinking, well, what's going to happen if, for example, I was to raise my price? If I raise my price, will my revenue go up or down? So if you raise your price by 10% and your volume falls by 10%, you're kind of back where you started. That would be elasticity of 1, is where that is. If you have elasticity of greater than 1, that would mean if you raise your price 10%, your volume would fall 20%, and you're going to lose out on that, because a 10% increase in price times a 20% decrease in volume is going to reduce your revenue. If you're dealing with demand which is inelastic, meaning that the quantity hardly changes at all for a change in price, this means if you increase your price, you're going to get nearly the same volume being sold, and you'd increase the revenue. So that was the point elasticity of demand. Another way of doing it is called what's known as the arc elasticity of demand, which kind of looks at midpoints rather than the starting point. So we're doing the arc elasticity of demand. The proportional change in the volume is still the same. It's going to be 1400 down to 2000. This time I'll write it the other way around. Okay, I'm going to ignore the signs anyway. But this time we're saying, well, let's take it on the midpoint of 1400 and 2000. And it's going to be 1700. So 1700 is 300 up and 1400 is 300 down and 2000. The midpoint of these 2 points here is going to be 1700. And on the bottom line, you have the proportional change in the price. And again, don't worry about the signs. It's 8 minus 6. But instead of doing it on the 8 there, we're saying, what's the mid price? Well, it's going to be 7 there. Okay. So we have got 600 divided by 1700. Going to be 0.35, call it. And on the bottom line, we have 1 divided by 7. It's 0.14. So we're coming out there 0.35 divided by 0.14. It's coming out at, that can't be right. Something's gone wrong. Oh, maybe it's all right. 0.35 divided by 0.14. It's okay. It's coming out there at 2.5. So it's still inelastic, it's a different figure, obviously. It looks even more, a bit more elastic. It looks as though the volume is changing even more significantly for that change in price. But this is just a feature of two ways of measuring that. Okay, that's the price elasticity of demand. Remember, proportional change in quantity divided by proportional change in price. But two ways of calculating it, either using the starting point for both quantity and price, or using the midpoint, which is the arc elasticity of demand. Now we come to the supply curve. The supply curve is what the producer faces here. And the supply curve, again, it doesn't have to be a straight line, points in the other direction really. It goes upwards. Because as you increase the price of the goods, then suppliers will be happy and willing to produce more and more products. The high price will encourage more producers to come into the market and to begin to sell. If you were to reduce the price, then a lot of suppliers are going to say, well, I can do better things with my machinery and so on. I don't want to be in this market because I'm making a pathetic profit because the quantity is so low. And if you reduce the price down and down and down and down, at some point, no one will want to make anything. So you'll gradually fall away from the market and presumably be left with the single most efficient producer who can still make a profit at this very low price. So as you change the price of the goods, you move along the supply curve. But then we have to again look at the shift in the supply curve, where it maybe shifts to the right or maybe shifts to the left. It can go that way as well. So what sort of things could encourage a shift to the right of the demand, a big one, the supply curve there? Why would producers decide to make more at the same selling price? And one reason they might be prepared to make more at the same selling price is maybe they get more efficient at production. So even though they're not getting any more per unit coming in, because they can get maybe economies of scale, they will be willing to produce more. It might be that the government gives them a subsidy. They say, if you produce more, then we'll give you a certain amount of money. And this will again encourage them to make more. Moving the other way, what's going to reduce the quantity which is supplied at a given price? Why would people fall away from the market? And it might be that raw material costs have gone up. So raw material costs have gone up. The price you're selling to the customers has stayed the same. And you say, well, again, it's not worthwhile me being in that. It could be that the government imposes or there's some sort of quota on production put in, so you're not actually allowed to produce anymore. You'll see in the notes a full list of reasons why the supply curve might shift to the right or shift to the left. And you have to, again, carefully distinguish that from moving up and down the supply curve, which is purely to do with changes in prices. When you bring, first of all, there's a price elasticity of supply here. The price elasticity of supply, again, is proportional. It's a proportional change in the quantity supplied over the proportional change in the price. Proportional change in the quantity over the proportional change in the price. So if the price were to go up maybe 5% and producers were willing to produce like 25%, then you have a price elasticity of supply of about 5. In other words, it's very price sensitive. Lots more suppliers will come in for this small change in price. Maybe it's easy for them to get into the market. But if something, a proportional change in price, let's say 10%, and the proportional change in quantity supplied was only 1%, people aren't responding to this change in price. And maybe it's because it's quite an expensive market to get into, or there's a lot of skills in getting into it, or maybe their machinery won't work any faster and they simply can't easily produce more until they spend a lot of money bringing new machinery in. Equilibrium of demand and supply. So here we have the demand curve, which is showing what your consumers demand. And here we have the supply curve, which is showing what the producers are willing to produce at a particular price. Now let's start off down here with a low price. And at this low price, you'll see the demand here exceeds the supply. So demand has not all been met. There'll be people anxious to buy these products, but they simply won't be available. We have a situation here of excess demand. And what's going to happen? Well, that excess demand, some of those people will be willing to pay a higher price to get their hands on this scarce product. And think of it as they are willing to pay a higher price, and so the price is going to move up here. And the higher price will encourage some of the producers to produce more units and so on. And it will keep moving in this kind of direction until we reach this equilibrium point here, where demand and supply are perfectly balanced. And they're perfectly balanced because of price movements. The price will move up until enough is demanded, or enough is supplied at this equilibrium price to completely match what is demanded. Let's take another situation here. We have a very high price. Because at a very high price, lots of suppliers will be anxious and willing to make lots and lots of goods. They see lots of revenue coming in from this high price. But of course, it's not very nice for the consumers. The consumers will say, oh, I'm not going to buy at this high price. I'll do without something of that sort. So here we have a situation of excess supply. What's going to happen if there's excess supply? Well, the manufacturers will be left with products they can't sell. And of course, you know what happens when shops or manufacturers are left with products they can't sell. They usually put on sales. They say, right, I'm going to reduce the price of this product by 10%, and they hope that this is going to encourage people into the shops to buy at a lower price. So they lower the price by 10%. This will increase the demand, and if the prices are lowered by 10%, they will produce more, or they want to produce less, or fewer producers who want to be in the market. And then it will gradually come down to reach this equilibrium point again, where there is some price, this market price, where the amount demanded by consumers is perfectly matched and kind of automatically matched by the price mechanism, automatically matched to the supply of goods which is available.